When you hear the word Vedas, these ancient foundational texts, you probably picture these profound hymns, these really complicated rituals. But there's one that kind of stands apart, one that's always been wrapped in a little bit of mystery and, well, a lot of misconception. Today, we're diving into the Atharvaveda.
So, let's get right into it. Everyone knows there are 4 Vedas, right? But the Atharvaveda, it's always been the odd one out, the one with this unique, sometimes even controversial reputation. It just doesn't always get talked about in the same way as the other 3, and we're about to find out why.
And look, this whole question about its status, it's not a modern debate. Not at all. It actually takes us to our very first point, the ancient controversy over whether it was even considered a main Veda in the first place.
So you've got these 2 camps, and the evidence for both is right there in the ancient texts. On one side, you see references to something called the Treyu Vidya, the threefold knowledge. This was the big trio, the Rigveda, Samaveda, and Yajurveda. They were the essential playbook for the huge public sacrifices, the yajnas. But then, you have tons of other really important texts like the Upanishads that clearly say, nope, there are 4 Vedas, and they explicitly name the Atharvaveda. So what's going on here?
Well, the solution to this whole puzzle is actually pretty elegant. It all comes down to function, not status. See, that term Treyu wasn't a list of all the Vedas that existed. It was more like a specific toolkit for a specific job, the yajna. And the Atharvaveda, it had a different job. Its focus was much more on the daily lives, the health, and the well-being of ordinary people, so it just wasn't part of that particular ritual toolkit. It was always a Veda, just one with a very different, and you could argue, a much more personal purpose.
And this idea of having a different purpose is really reflected in the text itself. Because, you see, it gets even more complex when you realize the Atharvaveda isn't just one book you can pick up and read.
Okay, let that sink in for a second, because this one simple fact completely changes how we should think about it. It's not a single volume that was written from page 1 to the end. It's much better to think of it as a kind of living library, a huge collection of knowledge, of hymns, of practices that were gathered and passed down over centuries.
And this living library idea? You can literally see it right here. All this knowledge was kept alive and transmitted through different schools, which were called Shakhas. And that word literally means branches. Just like a tree, each school had its own branch, its own version of the text. This is how ancient wisdom survived, not as some single, rigid master copy, but as a living, breathing, branching tradition.
And we actually know the names of many of these ancient schools. The 2 most famous versions that have actually survived to today are the Paipalada and the Shaunaka. It's just incredible to think that each of these represents a unique line of teachers and students, all preserving a slightly different flavor of the Atharvaveda's wisdom. It really shows you the immense diversity hiding within this one Veda.
All right, now we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Let's tackle that one big label that is stuck to the Atharvaveda for centuries, its reputation for magic and spells.
This is it. This is what most people think of when they hear Atharvaveda. That phrase, Jadu-Tona, magic and sorcery, has been its calling card for a long time. But is that really the whole story? Is that what's actually going on here? I mean, we really have to ask ourselves, are we missing the point when we use a modern word like magic to describe these ancient practices? What did it actually mean to the people who were using it every day?
The truth is, what we might dismiss as magic was their way of solving real-world problems. These weren't parlor tricks. This was about survival. These hymns and rituals were focused on the most basic human needs you can imagine. Healing sickness, trying to live a long, healthy life, protecting your family and your community, and just hoping for a prosperous future. You could almost call it a spiritual technology for dealing with the world.
And here's where it gets really fascinating. Because buried inside this spiritual technology, you find something that we today would absolutely recognize as the very early seeds of scientific thought.
The text was a collection of what's called Vidya-Vijnana, or knowledge science. And this wasn't just abstract philosophy. It included an incredibly detailed understanding of the human body, even describing the network of channels, or nadis, and how to manipulate them to stop bleeding. I mean, that's early anatomy and medicine. It also contains early principles of toxicology, how to deal with poisons. This wasn't just a book of chants, it was a practical manual for life. So, after we've peeled back all these layers of controversy and misunderstanding, what's the big picture? Why does getting the Atharvaveda right actually matter today? This is really the heart of it. The Atharvaveda is so incredibly valuable because it shows us that for ancient people, things we see as separate, like medicine, science, and spirituality, were all part of one big integrated way of understanding the world. It gives us this raw, unfiltered glimpse into their lives, their hopes, their fears, their cures for fevers, and their recipes for a good life. It's so much more than a religious text. It's a profound document of real human history.
And in the end, the story of the Atharvaveda kind of becomes a lesson for us, doesn't it? Its whole journey, from being called the fourth Veda to being dismissed as just magic, is a powerful reminder. It really forces us to ask, how many other pieces of ancient wisdom are we just completely misunderstanding, all because we can't see past the easy labels we've stuck on them?